The national debates about education choice usually focus on parents looking for alternatives to the public K-12 system. But education choice is actually already built into the public school system through open enrollment policies at the state level. So how do we improve these policies for families in Utah and throughout the nation?
And so that means if you have an open seat in a child's grade level, then a student should be able to transfer in and fill that seat.
On this episode, I sit down with two education experts to help us understand the current landscape of open enrollment policies at the state level, why compliance matters, and how to improve things moving forward. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking about education policy at the state level and trying to help answer that key question of how do we help parents and families be in the driver's seat when it comes to making decisions about their kids' education, where they learn, how they learn, and what role various aspects of education choice can play a role in that. And so to have this conversation, I'm excited to welcome into our virtual studio Christine Cooke Fairbanks, who is our Education Policy Fellow here at Sutherland Institute, and a new special guest for us this week, Jude Schwalbach, who is a Senior Education Policy Analyst for the Reason Foundation. Christine and Jude, welcome to Defending Ideas.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I'm excited to talk about this issue with both of you because I think, again, it's really getting to the core of a lot of the education debates we're having as a state and in other states as well. Maybe before we dive in, Jude, for folks out there who maybe aren't familiar with the Reason Foundation, can you give us kind of the quick primer, the intro for Reason Foundation, and then the kinds of things that you've been weighing in on in your role at Reason Foundation on education policy specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So Reason Foundation is a national 501c3 nonprofit research organization. We cover a broad array of policies. I'm on the education team, but we also have teams that consider things like criminal justice and transportation policy. If you go to reason.org, you can see all the issues we cover there, but we're a libertarian think tank. And so our team covers K-12 education, which means my work specifically pertains to K-12 open enrollment, which is a form of public school choice. But my colleagues also look into things like school finance as well. We've worked in that field for about well over a decade now.
Well, thank you for being with us and the work that you do across the nation and in various states. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today because here in Utah, we've been in our legislative session in the first part of the year. Other states, of course, having their legislative sessions. So there's always a lot to kind of cover and make sure we're up to speed on with respect to these kinds of education policy debates at the state level. And in my view, one of the bigger debates or issues that's come about in recent years on the education policy front is sort of the broad ecosystem of education choice, but then specifically how that ties into open enrollment. And Christine here on our team has done some tremendous work here in Utah on that front. Jude, I want to start with you. So at the Reason Foundation, you've done a lot of work and writing on sort of this idea of open enrollment policies across the nation, kind of the status of those. Can you talk about kind of your landscape analysis first? What would you say is sort of the state of open enrollment policies in different states? What's the momentum? Kind of what's the trajectory? What do you see from your vantage point?
Yeah, so open enrollment is a policy that lets students transfer to traditional public schools other than the residentially assigned one. There's two types of open enrollment. There's cross-district, which lets students transfer to schools in other school districts. And then there's within-district open enrollment, which lets students transfer to schools inside their district, but outside their catchment area or attendance zone. So families use these policies for a wide array of reasons. Generally, it's so that they can attend schools that are a better fit, but sometimes it's to escape bullying or access schools and districts that are more highly ranked, shorten families' commutes, or even like do things like access college level courses. Maybe there's an AP class in the district over that's not offered in your assigned district. So that's what open enrollment is. That's why families use it. And open enrollment programs were launched back in the late 1980s. Minnesota was the first state to establish one in state law. And soon after that, most states adopted open enrollment in some form or other. Today, there are 43 states with some sort of open enrollment law. And what we started doing in more recent years is going back and looking at those laws and seeing how they could be improved. So unfortunately, most laws are what we would call weak. It's because they're discretionary. So districts might have extra seats available in their classrooms, but they're not necessarily required to provide those seats to transfer students. So to strengthen open enrollment laws, we want to see states improve them so that they're statewide. And so that means if you have an open seat in a child's grade level, then a student should be able to transfer and fill that seat. And today we have 16 states that have strong cross-district open enrollment laws and 17 states that have strong within-district open enrollment laws. And Utah is one of those states. But more recently, last year we saw New Hampshire and Nevada and Arkansas codify strong within-district open enrollment policies. States that have recently established strong cross-district policies would be places like Oklahoma, Nebraska, Arkansas also established both cross and within district open enrollment policies in recent years. So we've seen a lot of growth in just the past 5 or 6 years when it comes to open enrollment. I'd say seven states have established robust cross-district open enrollment, and 7 states have established robust within district in recent years. So yeah, there's been a lot of growth. This is one of the most widely used forms of school selection. That's because not every state has charter school laws. Not every state has private school choice options. Since most states have some form of open enrollment in some fashion or other, we see that a lot of families are using. In fact, it's about, I collected data from 27 states and Washington, D.C., and about 1.8 million students are using open enrollment with the latest data.
Christine, I want to ask you what you see from the state level in Utah, and then we'll talk about some more about kind of the national context. I know Reason Foundation has a ranking, and there's some legislation on the move that's been moving here in Utah, and maybe some other states we can get to as well. But Christine, when you kind of think of where Utah sits relative to that national landscape that Jude just provided, I guess one question that comes to mind is, are we seeing more families in Utah want to use open enrollment? And if so, like, what do we do about it? How do we respond and make it better? Just kind of broad comments that how would you say the sort of the trajectory is for open enrollment here in Utah right now in the context of what Jude just described nationally?
Yes, so according to rankings, so both the Reason Foundation's annual report and also an ALEC report that was looking at education choice categories, Utah sits high in the rankings. So Reasons Foundation, they found that Utah earned an A minus. So that's actually quite good. And in the ALEC one, they earned an A for open enrollment. And that really looks at the structure of the law and what's written. And that's really valuable. What we found in Utah as we kind of tried to dive into this issue was that there was actually very little data for us to analyze statewide trends or even district trends. So the current law requires districts to post a capacity report. That's what we call it in our writings. But basically, it's like these 7 key pieces of data about open enrollment. They need to post it on their websites. The vast majority don't. Less than 30% do. So it's really hard to get at what the trends are. And I think that is at the core of the first reform in Utah that we need. We've also had surveys and interviews with parents that kind of give us anecdotal, evidence, I guess, in this area. And there's also, it's very much a patchwork of what's working well and what's not. And frustration about getting the right information. Maybe there's a lack of training inside districts about who knows what about this issue and where they're supposed to go. So those sorts of things are areas of opportunity for us to improve, right? And so Utah, I think we have a really good foundation, but we have a lot to improve as well.
Well, we need to take a break in a minute, but before we go to the next segment, Jude, I want to ask you kind of on the national scene. I mean, Utah apparently does pretty well in your ranking. Give us a sense of kind of where you see Utah relative to other states. Are there any patterns you see as far as states that tend to do really well when it comes to open enrollment policies versus states that tend to struggle? Anything that policymakers in any state, but especially maybe those of us here in Utah, ought to be aware of as we're looking at reforming and improving these things?
Yeah, so Utah does do pretty well in my rankings. It gets an A minus, but there are several states that do better. Places like Arizona, West Virginia, Idaho, and Oklahoma and Arkansas. And I'd say one area that most of those states, one thing that most of those states address that Utah does not is what Christine was just describing, that state level transparency. So I actually reached out to the Utah Department of Education last year because I was like, Utah has a great open enrollment program. I'd love to learn how many students are using it. And they emailed me back and said, yeah, we don't collect any. We have no idea. we don't collect any of that data. I was like completely shocked because even states that have weaker open enrollment laws typically collect that data. And I was able to gain it through data requests. So that's really where Utah could do well. But honestly, there are other areas like its robust cross and within district open enrollment program. Most states could really learn from Utah when it comes to those components of open enrollment policy.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dive in a little bit more to what's going on in Utah and maybe see how that might compare to any of the legislative activity in other states. And again, kind of help equip our listeners with some meat of this issue. So as we have conversations with folks in our neighborhoods, maybe our elected officials, we're able to articulate where Utah does well, where we can do better, and maybe what other states can do as well. Because again, this seems like one of those issues that might be easy for folks to overlook, that open enrollment is sort of a choice apparatus already built into our traditional K-12 public schools that could actually be really beneficial for a lot of families trying to make sure their kids are learning in the way that is best for them. So we'll dive into all of that and more right after this break. Again, this is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with Jude Schwalbach from the Reason Foundation and Christine Cooke Fairbanks here at Sutherland about open enrollment and how it helps education policy, broadly speaking, to improve at the state level. But I want to remind you first, if you like this discussion, if you like what you're hearing today, make sure to subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you like to get your shows. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you watch or listen. Just search for Defending Ideas and click subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, click the bell icon on your screen so you get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. You can find all of that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. So, Jude and Christine, I wanted to ask you both about kind of the state landscape and maybe start with Christine specifically in Utah. Because, again, this idea of open enrollment isn't just about sort of loosening the lines, so to speak, but it's really about helping to make sure the incentives are aligned, the information is transparent in such a way that parents are more in the driver's seat of being able to make sure their kids are in the best educational environment for them. And as part of that, you've done some work here at Sutherland on a new Open Enrollment Excellence Certificate Program. So I would like to ask you about that, maybe tell our audience what that is and why you think that's something that's valuable for this ongoing effort to try and improve open enrollment policy here in Utah. And then we'll also get into some of the legislative efforts.
Sure. So the Open Enrollment Excellence Certificate is really aimed at awareness, right? So we've discussed before how districts often aren't in compliance with the part of the law that requires them to post this data. But we've also noticed that it's sometimes a lack of awareness. We've done a lot of outreach and we'll get some good responses back. So I think a lot of it is districts are so overwhelmed with a lot of different requirements, and so we're sensitive to that as well. But in letting them know, hey, this is the requirement, and then giving praise where it's deserved, right? So this certificate, it comes down to this 5-part rubric. 1, are you in compliance with that part of the law? Then the other 4 are really just best practices from our perspective. How would a parent use this? How would a parent interact well with something on a website? So the second would be, do you use simple designations to show that a school is open or closed? It's not currently required by the law. So that could be like a red or a green, coloring there, or just an open and closed next to the language. There are some districts who went above and beyond and included that, and it's actually really useful. And that's something that would be very helpful for a parent that's looking for options. The third is that they post applications, right? So that's just like being very functional when you're looking for this information. The fourth is to have contact information for whoever is over open enrollment or alternatives in the school district, things like that. We found that that's a little bit hard to find as well. And then the fifth is that there's like a whole web page potentially dedicated to open enrollment or public options in that area that they can host. So there are some that have this standard already, and there's a lot obviously that do not. But again, we want to increase awareness. We want to find a way to motivate and incentivize. We, not just follow the law, which is great, but that's a bare minimum, and we can do even more than that, something I've written about. And so this is kind of what that's aimed at.
Jude, when you hear that kind of outline from Christine, how do you see that fitting into this overall discussion, and especially with what you've seen in other states? You've written about open enrollment progression in states across the country like New Hampshire and Michigan and Mississippi and many others, I believe. So when you kind of look at what could be done at a state level, there's obviously a legislative component, which we'll also get to in a little bit more detail. But then something like this that's a certificate program that's sort of trying to incentivize, I guess, and sort of outline here are not things you can do, not just in terms of complying with the law, but best practices. Is that common in other states? Is it not common? Is it the kind of thing we should all be striving for?
Yeah, so some districts, like Christine said, are just really good at posting information about their open enrollment programs on their websites. And having information online is important. It's because parents need to know when, where, and how to transfer schools. If that information is not posted online, then I don't really know how they're going to find out about it. I suppose they could walk into a school building and say, "Hello, I would like to transfer," but I don't think most parents have the time to do that, especially if there's no guarantee that transfer could occur. So just being really transparent about these processes is really important. There are at least 8 states that require districts by law to post their open enrollment policies and procedures and their available capacity by grade level online. I think that's a great policy to have in place because it just makes it really easy for families to learn about the transfer opportunities available to them. One thing I noticed well is the open enrollment participation can get really, really robust. Colorado, which is pretty close to you guys, 29% of public school students in Colorado use open enrollment. That means they're transferring either across district boundaries or within district boundaries to attend schools that are a better fit for them. And what that tells me is that they know about these options, and schools are advertising about transfer opportunities, and they're making sure it's really easy for families to learn about how to transfer. So I think that's a great example of how this program can really grow and be robust, and why it's important to make it easy for families to learn about these opportunities.
I want to hone in on the why for a minute, and Christine, ask you with something like this, sort of again trying to strive for the best practices idea of open enrollment policy. I want to ask you, how do you see this fitting into kind of the broader education choice landscape or discussion or even debates that we're having as a state? And how does this kind of reform, essentially trying to improve our open enrollment, either best practices or public policies as a state, or I guess compliance with those public policies, how do you see that kind of aligning with just the broad principles of education choice? And you've written about it for the Sutherland Insights blog. that an article about the education choice principles that Utah shouldn't forget. So kind of where do you see this fitting into those broader conversations and in pursuit of those broader principles that would kind of lead to this idea of true excellence when it comes to choice and open enrollment?
Yes. So exactly. Utah is having this ongoing discussion about education choice in the state, what we really want it to look like. Fine tuning private choice is definitely happening right now as well. But from our perspective, education choice is this really broad umbrella, right? And it just means any of the options, and you as the parent in the driver's seat are making those decisions. So if I were to narrow it down to two things, it's robust options and informed parents. And whether we're talking about the private lane or the public lane, that's really what the goal is. And so if we were to look at each segment with that standard in mind, if we're looking at open enrollment, we say, okay, robust options. We have plenty of school districts and schools and specialties and things within that. That's fantastic. Now we need informed parents. And that's really where I think a lot of the reforms are centered around, making sure that they understand. And it's not, this is something that I've talked about with different people about transparency. Transparency can be like, hey, is the data available? But then is the data really usable and digestible and user friendly? And so that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about kind of these best practices or this other kind of ideal or gold standard. That's what we should be aiming for. And that's in all of the areas of education choice. But, obviously right now this is about open enrollment. So there's plenty of space, like I've said, for improvement. And I think we're going to get there. And mostly because we are in a new culture and a new era of education choice. Parents now realize and have this expectation that they can shop around. And they're going to be looking deeper for this kind of information.
Well, we need to take another quick break. When we come back, I want to get into policy specifics. So talk about what Utah is doing or should do better. And then Jude, also maybe ask you about the same kind of question with other states. So if you were talking directly to state legislators, to governors, you both have been very involved at the legislative level. What are the kinds of things that need to be conveyed for us to improve this as a state? And then Jude, from your perspective, in other states as well. So we'll get into those details right after this break. Again, this is Defending Ideas. Stick around.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with Jude Schwalbach with Reason Foundation and Christine Cooke Fairbanks with Sutherland Institute. We want to remind you to subscribe to Defending Ideas. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell icon so you get a notification each time a new episode drops. That's every Tuesday morning. Wherever you get your shows, just search for Defending Ideas and click subscribe, or visit defendingideas.org, where you can find this episode and previous conversations and also shorter video clips that you can use on your own social media profiles and in your discussions with folks about these issues. Again, all of that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. Christine and Jude, I want to ask about some of the details about what's been happening on the legislative side of this issue. And maybe, Christine, let's start with you, just because you've written a lot about Utah's open enrollment policy from the standpoint of where we do really well, where we can still improve. And in fact, you recently published kind of an FAQ document on our Sutherland Insights blog about some of the legislative efforts here in Utah during the session. And we'll just note at time of recording kind of where things stand or where they're going, knowing that legislatively things move very quickly. But maybe give us some high level, Christine, from your vantage point, where are we as a state in terms of our legislative policy when it comes to open enrollment? And what do you think needs to happen next from the state legislature at the state level to improve things?
So I mean, like we said, we have some great policies on the books, but one that Jude has talked about and I've talked about is that there's no state level report. So there is an important bill. People who care about this issue probably want to tune into what's happening with it. But HB 528, this is local school board reporting. Representative Cheryl Acton is the sponsor. And this really seeks to increase compliance at the district level and also to create that state report that we don't have currently. So, first, districts need to take the data, which, by the way, this is data they already are required to gather and to post. But now it takes a step further and says, take that data and report it to the state board, including now a contact information for, an open enrollment specialist. And the second part of the bill is that the state needs to put forward this information so it's in aggregate of what the data looks like for all the schools, what it looks like for all the districts, even like a rate of open enrollment in the different schools and districts and things like that. And the list of contact information for the different districts. So the beauty there of having the state board post on their website is that their website already has a data gateway. It's a very common sense, predictable place that parents might go to for information already. And so to host that there would be, essentially kind of creating a one-stop shop for parents that want to look into this. It also gives this really easy statewide view of what's happening here. Because right now, again, it's not public and there's no way to look at those trends. So policymakers that are interested in this topic can look at year-over-year trends and make some good reforms going forward. And this is especially relevant. Utah, like a lot of the nation, right, but are seeing these noticeable enrollment declines in public schools, right? And there's a lot of discussion in Utah about school closures and where they're happening and why they're happening and things like that. This would be really important information to have as you're trying to understand that issue. So from a number of layers, like definitely parents want to have this information, but policymakers in the state will want to have this too.
Jude, how do you view that kind of that legislative discussion here in Utah about some ways to improve things? I guess maybe any thoughts on that specifically in Utah from your vantage point, and then put that in context for us with what you've seen happening in other state legislatures.
Yeah, HB 528 would definitely be a step in the right direction. It would. So every year I publish a annual open enrollment report where I review the open enrollment laws in all 50 states and update and provide scores and rankings for every state's open enrollment law. Utah scores an A- on this in this paper. HB 528 would improve that to an A. So it'd be a nice step in the right direction and put it sort of more on par with states like West Virginia and Arizona. Other states that are they're sort of thinking along the same lines would be places like New Hampshire, where they're actually just trying to catch up to Utah. So New Hampshire has a within district open enrollment law, just like Utah does, but they're considering establishing a strong cross district open enrollment law, which would probably bump them up to make them a competitor with Utah. Michigan's also thinking about this. There was a proposal in Mississippi, but unfortunately, it's dead now. But yeah, I think more states are thinking about adopting strong open enrollment laws. It just creates flexibility within the public system, and like Christine has said, families really value that flexibility. I think it's really hard for families when you move into a neighborhood and you don't, if you have kids, you don't know if that school's going to be the right fit for your kid. You don't know what sort of people they're going to start hanging out with. Are they going to get bullied? Are their teachers going to be like the right sort of teachers that they need? And you don't know that till you're there. And so providing flexibility within the system so students can transfer. And in some cases, that means like ensuring that there are opportunities to transfer mid-year. A lot of states usually only have application windows once a year, which that's good. But places like Wisconsin have adopted things like a secondary application window right after that's supposed to happen around the winter break. And when state policymakers codified that law, or after they codified the law, Wisconsin is one of the states that has really good open enrollment data, sort of the sort of stuff we'd love to see happen in Utah. But you can see that the participation rate in open enrollment jumped. It's because families realize like halfway through the school year that, this school isn't working for my kid. They need to go somewhere else, and they make that transfer. So that's just the sort of information that good open enrollment data can provide it. And you think it's great for policymakers, and they're like, this bill actually made a difference in people's lives. They're using this policy. And it just doesn't, sort of go into the ether and no one knows. So I think it can guide policymakers and help them make decisions, and also help families, just get a sense for how districts are implementing their open enrollment policies. Are they doing it well? One area that Utah could also improve in would be with regard to how districts handle open enrollment denials. So what they could do, and places like California have done this, is that they provide rejected applicants with the reasons for why they were rejected in writing. Maybe it's because of the student's disciplinary record, or maybe they just don't have space for that student in their school. So that would be a step in the right direction for Utah. Or and also having like a neutral appeals process. It's never fun to appeal to the entity that rejected you. It doesn't always feel very fair. But yeah, those are some ways Utah could improve, and those are other states are considering policies like those as well.
Well, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I want to kind of ask a version of the question I always like to end podcast episodes with. So first of all, if there's anything I missed that either of you think, hey, this really is something that needs to be said in the context of this conversation, please kind of work it into your answer to make sure we covered everything. But also what I want to ask is, if we're in an elevator with the governor of Utah, maybe Christine, in your case, the governor of Utah, legislative leadership, and then Jude, in your case, just any of the other states you're working on, or kind of states broadly. If you had just a few seconds to sort of convey one key, most important message when it came to the reason why we need to or how to improve our open enrollment policies at the state level, what's like the one big thing you would say that is just the message they need to walk away with from this discussion? Christine, we'll start with you on the state level. What's the one big thing folks at the policymaker level here in Utah need to know and remember about this issue?
Yeah. Well, our state law says that parents have the primary responsibility to be the decision maker for their kids' education. And if we believe that, we need policies that reflect that. And this policy in this bill and the ones we've described here would definitely do that. At least move us in that direction. So, and in a way, this is a common sense and simple tweak to go in that direction. I think it's worth it.
Jude, we'll give you the last word. You're in this brief conversation with policymakers at the state level. Anything you'd add to what Christine said? What's the one big takeaway for these folks?
Yeah, I think that families want to be in the driver's seat when it comes to their kids' education. And policymakers should ensure that families that want to stay within the public system can do that. You want to create a system where families have the opportunity to transfer schools that are the right fit for their kids. Like I said earlier, you don't know if the school that they're assigned to is going to work out for them. You might not even have kids yet, and so you're really just gambling. This massive investment you make as a family. You don't even know if the school is going to be the right fit for your kids. So just ensuring that kids have the option to transfer to a school that's going to be a place where they'll succeed academically and in their friendships and relationships. I think that's the real key to this policy. And the data from other states really backs this up in terms of this is how families use this policy. And it just makes the public education system more family friendly when families have the option to choose within it.
Well, we will leave it there for time. Thank you again to Christine Cooke Fairbanks, our education policy fellow here at Sutherland Institute, and Jude Schwalbach from the Reason Foundation, senior education policy analyst. Thank you both for lending your time and expertise to us here on Defending Ideas.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
We're going to take a final break before we leave you with some talking points from this conversation. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back, and thanks again to Sutherland's Christine Cooke Fairbanks and Jude Schwalbach from the Reason Foundation for joining us this week. From this episode, I think we can take away 3 key messages that we should use whenever we get into a discussion about how to improve education policy generally or education choice specifically. Number one, remember that parents and families, generally speaking, want to be in the driver's seat when it comes to their own kids' education. Parents want to ensure that their children are in the best educational environment possible for their unique needs. And so, of course, public policy should reflect and support that. Number two, the state of Utah's official position actually very clearly supports that principle, that parents are those chiefly responsible for their kids' education. This also aligns with one of the core principles of Sutherland Institute from our Statement of Principles, which says, the relationship between parents and their children is vital, with parents chiefly responsible for directing the care and education of children to lead flourishing lives. And number three, the specifics of our public policy should better align with those principles. One of the great ways to do that is to ensure transparency when it comes to open enrollment policies, processes, and data. But transparency alone may not be enough because parents also need that information to be accessible and actionable. Utah taking important steps in these directions is good for students, good for families, and good for our entire state. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it valuable. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.